Hello everyone, I'm going to give you a quick overview of prompt.js, which is Clockwork Chilli's latest project. It's best described as a command prompt on steroids. It understands DOS, JavaScript and HTML5, but I'll just show you how it works. Let's just open a Windows folder and let's right click on the background of the folder and let's select prompt.js here. It opens a prompt.js window at the current location, and you'll notice that it looks much like a DOS command prompt, and indeed you can use it as a DOS command prompt, but it's a lot more useful. First of all, it understands DOS commands, so if you want to list the files in a directory or change directories, you would do it as you would normally do it with DOS. And it also accepts the shortcut keys, for example, if I press tab now, it expands the file names and the directory names and lets you do anything that you would normally do in DOS. But it's already a little bit more useful, as you can see, because, well, there are colors to differentiate between different things, and it's also got some sensible copying and pasting. So, if you want to select a bit of text and then copy, Control-C, or paste, Control-V, and also you can resize the window as much as you like and even make it full screen, which is quite nice. But also it's got a lot of new DOS commands, but I'm not gonna show you that right now, but maybe later. But one important thing, however, is that, for example, if I type a path name, so for example C Python 27, it understands it's a path and not a command, and it opens Explorer in that location. And this also implies that I can type dot, which is a valid path in DOS, and it opens an Explorer window at the current location, which is sometimes really useful. And it also understands the difference between local paths and internet addresses. So if I type www.amazon.com, for example, it will launch my predefined web browser, in this case Firefox, and it will show the page that I'm looking for. And there are lots of other features like this, but let's look at the more interesting JavaScript things. So far I've only used some DOS syntax, but prompt.js understands other types of syntax. So for example, if I type in an arithmetic expression, 8 times 4 plus 1, it understands it and it says 33. Also, it understands any JavaScript, so I can create a variable x that equals 8, for example. And if I do x plus 5, then I get 13. Also, I can do more complex JavaScript. So let's see, var y equals new object. And then I can assign properties to y.a equals 1, y.b equals hello, a string. So now if I ask what is the value of y, I get this nicely formatted JSON, which sometimes can be really useful. And also I can use functions, so var f equals function, and say that I need a function that takes 2 arguments and adds them together. But you see, it would be a bit inconvenient to do this on a single line, so instead of pressing enter now, I'm pressing shift enter, which opens this inline editor with syntax highlighting, which means that I can write more complex stuff quite easily. So now I've defined my function here, and then I can do f2, 3, and it returns 5. Now, a nice feature here is that I'm also able to go back and edit this function. So just by typing edit f, I get this back, and I can change my mind. And now I want to multiply a and b together instead of adding them up. So now if I do f2, 3, this returns 6, which is correct. Now you see this edit here is one of the new DOS commands that I was talking about. There are quite a few useful ones. So just to make an example, if I want to Google for something, I can do this. Let's see what's the weather in London. And this is going to open my browser again with the information I'm looking for. And another interesting feature is that I can kill a process. So let's just kill Firefox. But one really useful thing, let's navigate to a different folder. I've got a very simple JavaScript game here. So in this directory, as you can see, I've got an index.html and a JavaScript file and a couple of other files that I'm using for this very simple game. So now let's say that I want to create a web server that just shows the files in this directory. Because prompt.js is built on top of Node.js, this is actually very easy, and we've added a very convenient command that's called server. So let's type server 54321, for example, and this will open a server on port 54321 and link it to this directory. So now if I navigate to my localhost 54321, I will access this directory. So yes, it's a very simple game in this case, but you could use it for anything you like. Now back to some JavaScript. Let's see how this is actually really useful sometimes. Let's go to C Python 27 and let's see what we have in this directory. Now let's say that we want to do some file operations that would normally be really tricky to do in DOS. So for example, we want to get all the files in this folder and change the name only of files that start with the letter R, and change their name and make it lowercase, so this readme.txt will actually be lowercase after we've done our operation. So let's get a list of files. First of all, we need a file system object, which if you use Node.js before, this is going to be familiar, but that's all there is to it. This is a file system object. And let's get a list of files in this directory. So let's have a look at these variable files. It's an array of all files and directories in here, and now we want to write some JavaScript that iterates over all these files and looks for the ones that start with a certain letter and change their names. So let's do this in the editor maybe. So let's just execute this code. Then if we do dir to list the files in this directory again, you see that it's changed to lowercase. So this is just an example of how you could do easy file operations that would otherwise be really quite complex. And you see I've used this fs rename sync function, which is a Node.js function. Now let's say that I don't remember the syntax of this function. I don't remember what it does. I can just type the function name without actually executing the function, and this will give me the source code of that function. And this implies that I can also edit fs.rename sync and change the behavior of this function to make it do whatever I like. So it's a really powerful tool. And there are lots of other nice JavaScript things that we've added to prompt.js. there is a prompt.js object, and it comes with a lot of helper functions. So for example, if you want to wget, if you want to download the source code of a web page, youtube.com for example, you can do it. It's doing it now. And if I wanted to maybe save it to a file, hey.html, I could do that as well, so that later on I can edit a.html and change the source code if I really wanted to do it. But this is just an example of what you could do with prompt.js. But another really useful function is the log function. So I could log or type any text that would then appear in the console. So if I did this, it would type hello world, it would print hello world, and it's the same as doing it DOS style, but it's better because it also understands HTML. So instead of logging plain text, I could create a button or any HTML element, and it would just appear here. And you could make it interactive if you wanted. You could attach an on-click event handler to this button, for example, and so on. There are so many more functions that we've added that we're not going to list them all here. But this also understands jQuery and also underscore and backbone.js. So now let's get to the fun part, the HTML5 part. Now CLS clears the screen like DOS, and I'm left with a nice blank screen. So let's change the current working directory to see pictures. And I've got a couple of image files in here, and now I want to do some image processing using HTML5. And this is going to be really easy, especially because prompt.js is integrated with the Wade engine, which makes this sort of things really, really quick. So the first thing that we want to do is use Wade to load an image. And we also want to show a Wade window up here. Now I'm going to show you what it does. So let's create a new sprite that uses this image. And you'll notice that with tab you can autocomplete file names, which is really handy. And let's create a scene object that uses this sprite, and let's tell Wade to add this object to the scene. And here it is. Here's a picture. You could make a game with this if you wanted, because Wade is designed especially for games. So, we're not going to do this now, but just for fun, let's tell this object to move 100 pixels to the left with a speed of 50 pixels per second, for example. And you could do all sorts of interactive stuff by listening for input events and reacting to them and so on. But now we just want to do some image processing. So Wade for each pixel of birds.jpg, let's execute a function that modifies the red, green, blue and alpha values of the pixel. And I'm going to use the code editor to do this because it's going to be a little bit easier. So we look at the red value, and these numbers are between 0 and 255. So if red is less than 100, so there isn't a lot of red, or green is more than red, or blue is more than red, then in this case we want to calculate an average value of the red, green and blue and make the pixel black and white. And we want to return an object with red, green, blue and alpha values. So let's execute it, and you see that this has changed our picture, and we can see in real time what we're doing. And if we're not happy with some of these numbers, we can go back and change them, and it's very quick to do this and see what you're doing as you do it. But now let's say that I'm happy with this image transformation that I've done, and now I want to save this picture. I could get data URL of this picture, get image data URL, which, if you don't know what it is, data URL is simply this. It's a long string that contains all the data for the image, and in this case it's an image, but it could be something else. And with prompt.js I can save a data URL to a file which I'm going to call coolbirds.jpg. And now let's say that I'm happy with this process and I want to save the whole process so I can apply it to lots of other images. I could look at the command history, and this is basically everything I've typed here, but that's a bit too much. So instead, let's look at only the JS commands, and let's limit it to the last dozen commands that we've entered. So let's see, we don't care about moving the object around, and we probably don't care about printing the data URL. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a function that does all this. And instead of hard coding the image name, I'm passing it as a parameter to this function. Okay, that looks correct. So now process image is this function here, and I can save this function. So save process image to a file that I'll call my script.js. And now in this folder I've also got a myscript.js file that contains the definition of process image. So I can load it even after I close this session of prompt.js. I can go back to it. So let's apply this with clear scene and process image. Let's do this on a different picture. And there we go, we've got a red squirrel on a black and white picture, which is really cool. And this will have created a cool squirrel.jpg file. So that is pretty much it. And in fact, there are many more things that you can do with prompt.js, but we're just getting started here, and this is the first version. And although there are a few bugs and a few problems that we know about, we thought we'd release it because it's already incredibly useful. And it's open source, so if you want to contribute by changing things or porting to more platforms, you're more than welcome to do so. Thank you.